other attendees of the event. Also, today, continuing our AI use case exhibition, there are some really cool stands that are worth taking the time to stop by. And just a quick reminder that this exhibition is both here in the bottom floor, but also upstairs in the first floor. The second one is the auditorium. In the first floor, there are more stands of the AI use case exhibition. And now to continue with our plenary session, we are good to go ahead. So our next session is titled The Human Imperative, Ethics, Responsibility, and Public Perception. And I will be moderating it myself with Robin Geiss and Ambassador Stephan Klement. So we will be joining the stage in just a second and get started. Thank you. There we go. Right. We are ready to continue. I would like to introduce our panelists first. Not that they need much introduction, but I'm going to do it anyways. If everyone could please take their seats. Thank you very much. As I said, I am the lucky person who will be moderating this panel. And we're going to have a conversation with Robin Geiss, Director of UNIDER since 2021, with over 20 years of experience in international law, peace, and security. He has held senior academic and advisory roles and is widely published in international humanitarian and security affairs. Welcome, Robin. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
And we also have with us Ambassador Stephan Klement, EU Special Envoy for Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, with decades of experience in arms control, international security, and multilateral diplomacy. Welcome, Ambassador. Pleasure to have you as well. We're just gonna, this session is gonna be kind of like a time travel, we could say, where we have been, where we currently are, and where we are aiming to be in the close future. So to do this, to begin our conversation, I would like to set the scene by placing this edition of the summit within the 3-year journey of the RE-AIM and, well, obviously today's ever-evolving geopolitical landscape. So my question is simple, but not too simple, because I know there's some intricacies to it, but I would like to know where RE-AIM stands today, given, as I said, the geopolitical landscape, and how did we get here? How did we reach today's state of affairs in the context of AI applied to the military? Ambassador, if you would like, we could start with you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here, and thank you for this very pertinent question, which is, I think, very central, because as we know, the RE-AIM process now is going on for more than 3 years, and I think it's very central that this meeting was organized here in Spain at this point, because obviously, as we know, artificial intelligence is a very multidisciplinary, multifaceted phenomenon. It's what we would frame as new technologies. Let me maybe say one thing which was not said here so much yet. In the history of mankind, new technologies have always been developed, and obviously mankind had to cope with these technologies. What is different, I think, at this stage is that the speed of development, the combination of different technologies puts us in a totally different picture, and this is why RE-AIM is so central, I think, because it puts a certain context between different stakeholders. It's from the military, government, regulatory authorities, industry, research, but also civil society, and I think this is a very important kind of forum where new ideas can be developed and some kind of snapshot can be made of the situation. But let me also maybe give you a bit of overview on when RE-AIM started. The world, in particular from a security perspective and from a political perspective, looked very different. And since then, the geopolitical tensions have been increased, the geo-economic tensions have been increased, and we have also been seeing, I would say, in many areas, the use of artificial intelligence, including in the military field, and from this lessons can be drawn. So I think this is a very pertinent moment here for RE-AIM to take place, and also to, of course, to look back, to take stock, but also to look then later on into the future.
Yeah, thank you very much. Robin, where are we and how did we get here?
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here at the 3rd RE-AIM Summit in A Coruña. UNIDIA has been a sustained supporter of this process really very much from the inception and even before it. So it's really great to see this journey and to be here today. Over the past 3 years alone, I mean, the world has changed so significantly. We're really in an interregnum phase just now. The old order has unraveled. The new order is not yet here. Lots of pieces are in the air. And one of the big pieces that's kind of up in the air is AI. You know, huge opportunities, obviously, economic, militarily, geostrategically, but also significant risks in this technology, which we will need to master going forward. But it just is one of the many pieces there. I mean, just today, as you will probably have seen in the news, the New START treaty is expiring. When you're leaving A Coruña tomorrow, we're in a new era and a different world without any caps on nuclear arsenals in this world. And this is just one other big piece in all the many pieces up in the air. So I think there's lots of uncertainty. And even with all the opportunities and all the risks, we don't exactly know how AI is going to play out in the end, in some ways at least. And so it certainly adds naturally, as any new technology, certain layers of uncertainty that we should better manage. And in that sense, I think RE-AIM is extremely timely, very much on point also in bringing the different actors that really matter for how we shape and govern AI in the future, bringing them together. So now is an important moment. We're really at an inflection point. I think RE-AIM has come a long way. We have good insight on the principles. RE-AIM has really, I think, been helpful and supporting and complementary to other processes in having clarity about international law applies. Yes, there should be and must be human judgment in critical decisions in particular. We have a much better understanding that we can shape this environment. We will need to create conditions to govern this technology. There's really, the question really is, do we just let it go? and then battlefield necessities and pressures determine the rules? Or do we manage in some way to set the rules and guide this technology into a productive, beneficial for all future? I think REAIM has also generated the insight among industry, among the military, that poorly governed AI cannot possibly be in anyone's good interest. You know, high failure rates, little control under battlefield pressures is certainly not something the military is keen on implementing in its control command structures. For industry as well, poor governance of these technologies is not a good business case, is not something that shareholders in the future will value. And I think that insight has really sunk in for many. So we have created not just some golden nuggets with REAIM, but I think some real building blocks. And the challenge now, as has been said a million times at the summit, is really to get into the doing and to operationalize these principles. And maybe one last point, sorry for going long. I think the REAIM format, should be seen as one of different platforms that are currently available. We have a super complex problem, so we want a super big toolbox to address it. REAIM is one of the big tools in that box to me. And its beauty is the flexibility that it can bring, the open-mindedness with which certain ideas can be stress tested here, taken on board or dropped if they don't fly. I think we need this kind of flexibility, agility, creativity in the process. And to my mind, REAIM, with all the different actors that it can bring together, is really the forum to do it. We've seen over the last period between Seoul and now A Coruña how we have brought regional insights to this international multilateral level discussion we're having here, and vice versa. We've brought international insights and emerging standards and idea to the different regions. And I think that's a very beneficial process, and we have to keep that dynamic going, but clearly now turning away from principle and getting into the doing.
Thank you. Before moving on to the future, I would like just for us to stay one more second and where we are today. And in the same way that there are some key moments in, I come from the industry side, so everything related to new LLMs, the fact that ChatGPT makes AI accessible, diffusion models for AI generation, they pinpoint moments in time very relevant to the industry. So I wanted to ask you, in terms of AI applied to the military, what would be some or one of these key moments or lessons that have shaped the vision that both of you just gave us on how things are today? Robin, we can continue with you, and then the ambassador.
Key moments, I'm not so sure. To me, this really is a gradual and iterative process. So, I couldn't point to any particular moment. DeepSeek release in 2025 obviously kind of turned attention to the levels technology can reach. I think open source models have, over the past kind of year, emerged as a concern, and proliferation would be the consequence of it. I think the insight, as not a particular moment, but we've seen in battlefields around the world that one thing is very clear: machine warfare is coming. And it's partially already here, and it's certainly coming. And the trend, it's towards more autonomy. And the continuation of that trend will be conflict zones where there are no people anymore. And I think this is not the far distant future. This is already in a way up on us. And this is something, not a key moment, but a key insight from looking around battlefields and how things are conducted today. Proliferation of drones. 10, 15 years ago, a high-end technology for just a few. Now it's the default technology in battles around the world. So that should give us a lesson to the proliferation of other digital AI-related technologies in the future. I think also the insight, AI will have huge consequences across the entire field of military operations, can pose a big challenge to our current deterrence models. If the oceans become transparent, because there's so many autonomous little systems that can monitor submarines, track submarines, identify submarines all of the time. Not currently possible and not up on us so quickly, but when these things are implemented at scale, and if submarines become traceable, second strike capabilities and current deterrence models are really put into question. It's just one example. We, I think, also know we will see battlefield operations that are just unexpected. And in part, that's part of a natural evolution of new technology, but the thought that a submarine could release a swarm of drones, could go upstream and then release a swarm of drones into a city is not a distant idea, and probably not the most creative in this scenario. I'm just making it up kind of here and now. I'm sure there's other creative people working on how these technologies can be leveraged in the future. So there's not that one momentum. There's a pretty big challenge of rather complex issues that will put in question many of the assumptions on which military currently exercises power, conducts battlefield operations.
Yeah, so it's like a set of advancements or rapid lessons that we learn that make up the final point of where we are today. Stephan, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, thank you. I would very much see it in the same way as Robin does it, or build on what he has said. I think it's not so easy to speak about key moments, it's more key trends and key insights which we have been gaining over the last years. And I think listening to many of these discussions, it's absolutely right, there are many parallel discussions ongoing. What is really clear that military AI and civilian AI cannot be fully separated. And I think this is something which is, and I think this diversifies the different options, different scenarios, as Robin has been saying. And I think it's very relevant to follow all the trends in all the areas. And as I said, re-aim is one of the areas. And from the European Union perspective, because we try to, in a certain way, build capacity also for our member states, but also for third countries, in a certain way to bring countries to a level that they can assess and in a certain way handle this AI. Because in order to, how to say, manage AI in a responsible way, you have first to understand and to be trained well.
Yeah, thank you. I think that is very complementary to the point Robin mentioned. But since we know where we are now, I would like to move on to the future, maybe not so distant future, and maybe share your perspective and reflect together on your vision on where re-aim goes next and what should be our priorities that shape the future of AI governance in the military domain. So to do this, I have a very short question, which is where do we go from here? But if possible, could we talk about maybe specific steps or practical steps that we could take to achieve the goals that we all share in this room? Stephan, if you want to continue with that?
No, I think it's very central that on the one hand we have this kind of multi-stakeholder overarching framework, which re-aim is. And this is very good, I think, because as we said, it breaks the silos in a certain way. It is a fertile ground for developing new ideas and develop a better understanding of the overall situation. But then, of course, work has also to continue in the vertical, if I may call it the vertical way, in more in-depth consultations or discussions or developments in industry, in research, in the military, but also in the civilian field. And I think, in particular at the state level, I think we have to look at the situation where, I mean, we live here in a certain way in the Western world, but in many countries there's a significant shortage of what I would call AI literacy. And here I think what was very positive that yesterday we participated also in a panel on regional consultation, the outcome of regional consultations, regional outreach, which took place. I think this will be more central to build some kind of more decentralized processes or hubs or centers of excellence, which will help to build capacity in particular. And in terms of capacity building, I think this has also many dimensions. And of course, there's on one hand some very technical element. And of course, what is often misunderstood that not only those actors who develop artificial intelligence are affected by it. And I think this kind of awareness has first of all to be raised. And then, of course, I think it's very central to help all actors in this field. And I think artificial intelligence will become a global technology, like when I think in the 18th or 19th century, when the steam machine and the automotive industry was developed, nobody thought that at some point the whole world would be flooded with automotive kind of machines. And I think this is something which is going to come. And this is why this responsibility is also, of course, with those who are on the forefront of developing these technologies, to also invest into kind of processes in those countries which will absorb this technology.
Thank you, Stephan. Robin, where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think the next aim should not be the next summit kind of thing, to just have one summit after the other. I think what we've seen in the past cycle, so to say, in RE-AIM, where the Global Commission has done really good work in shaping things and teasing things out, we need to plan the road ahead to the next summit so that the next summit can be a real goal post in this development and can be a real success. And I think the chances, with all the odds and all the challenges we're facing in the world, but the chances are actually good that now, if we do get into operationalization, we could identify areas where we dive much deeper. That, to me, would be the task ahead of us on whatever stakeholders choose. Drilling down on the human-centric principle. What does it mean? What elements are there? What elements must be there to make it truly meaningful? What I mentioned earlier, creating conditions for governability. How do we need to design the technology? What kind of interfaces do designers need to implement to actually make it governable? Because you can build it in a way it's just going to be too hard to govern or navigate in any meaningful way. I don't see there's interest to do that. So I think the chances and the odds are pretty good that also with industry and other players, the military, we can really get real about lots of this. We have a list of principles, as I said earlier, that are there as principles. But of course, there's really difficult questions also. How do they work when they're stress tested? How do they work when they meet real-world designs of the technology? It's one thing to come up with the principle here in this room, but then how does it actually work? How does it work even worse under battlefield pressures when adversarial activities get into the mix? This is hugely challenging. The ideal scenario would be we can create an atmosphere and an ecosystem where this can be addressed and discussed. It's not obvious that these really difficult trade-offs that could emerge in real-world battlefield operations, could be meaningfully addressed. But if we can manage to create that ecosystem, that atmosphere, that would be a huge achievement and quite a novelty actually in the whole history of arms control if we could go that way. It would be arms control by design, and maybe RE-AIM is a platform to really rethink this entire field. Because, a big convention with consensus around these issues that we're addressing here, I just don't see it in the near future. So we have to think about other creative ways of actually, being productive and having meaningful impact. That, I think, is the future for multilateralism at large. And to me, sometimes I think of RE-AIM as one of the possible blueprints and models to also show us how in a multipolar world with multi-dimensional threats, we can create new, more dynamic fora in which these things can then, in complementarity to other places. The UN certainly a very relevant place for these issues, but it can possibly work better if we can interlink fora like this with things that are happening at the UN and in other multilateral places.
Yeah, so kind of working through the segmentation in order to get a place that benefits everyone. So if you... I was going to leave this question for last, but since we're on this topic, I'm gonna do it, because I wanted to ask you a very similar question, but it's kind of a summary for you. What would say in a couple sentences would be the top priorities for ensuring military AI is developed and used responsibly in the following years? Because we have heard a few examples, there's many steps ahead, but if we should leave the room with an idea of what our priorities should be, what would that look like? Stephan, we can start with you.
Yeah, thank you. Very pertinent question. The European Union has always been taking the lead in kind of making sure that all kinds of developments, emerging technologies are fully compliant with international law, in particular international humanitarian law. And I agree what was also said, there are often many processes in parallel ongoing, kind of these coalitions of the willing, UN processes. But I think this can also be mutually reinforcing in areas which develop very fast, in the assumption that this process will be put together to some converging initiative in the end. And I think this is the long-term objective. But in terms of human control, as you mentioned, and Robin alluded already to a few dimensions, of course, in addition to the technical dimension, how systems are being built, and the training, so to make kind of users of artificial intelligence aware of what are the parameters, the limitations of this system, in order to be able to make some human judgment in the end. I think it's very important how the governance process is being organized, and here I think REAIM can make an important contribution, because we have, if I may call this, also practitioners present here. And then of course maybe in addition to this, there's one very important dimension. If we see this kind of phenomenon, or it's not a phenomenon, it's a very well-known fact that we live in aging societies, and so many functions in the civilian field today are already carried out by robotics or artificial intelligence. I'm thinking about surgery or healthcare and other things. I think also in the military field this may be an important trend happening in the future, and I think here the kind of ethic and human-centered and humanitarian controlled approach it will be very important to factor in from the beginning. And of course this is also an area of the future, so it's I think very important also to responsibilize the next generation, or to help the next generation to get involved more. And I'm happy to see many young people also here, but I think the future is still to come, so there will be more and more for this next generation to absorb, and human control is really, I think, at the center of the challenge which we will face in this area.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really good that you mentioned humans and human control, but before that, Robin, what would be your top priorities?
I don't know top priorities. I mean, there also I would say we have already, made quite some way. We much better understand that there's a wide spectrum of possible AI applications, and they're not all the same, and there is no one-size-fits-all approach to this. There's really, we have developed categories of risks, so of operations that are really hardcore battlefield operations, and there the stakes and the risks are very high. But of course, there's many other applications. There's very little risk involved, and they're probably not our priority concern. So we have a mapping, so to say, to prioritize, and we kind of know where we really need to look first and where we need to look the hardest. That's a good way to start, I think, now going forward. I think we've also understood that we need to look across life cycles, and we need to look not just at the technology, but at decision-making architectures and ecosystems. There is a lot more around AI than just the technology. There is how humans interact with the technologies. There is where does AI sit in the command chain? What does it actually do? What spectrum of tasks and questions does it get asked to solve? And all this matters. So a more holistic approach to how we would address this from a governance perspective. And I think with that, we're well prepared to get real about it and to drill down certainly on human judgment, human control. On issues like accountability, I think, if I was the CEO of any of the industry players, I would be extremely keen that accountability gets sorted out. Because the reality is that in the future, now that these technologies are applied at scale, there will be accidents and there will be failure. It's unthinkable that there wouldn't be. Like, there is never 100% with any technology. And then there will be questions about accountability, and most likely they will be solved in domestic courts that will apply fairly rigorous accountability regimes in the civil law domain and in the criminal law domain. So, even though on the international level we haven't gone so far on accountability, that doesn't mean there is a vacuum. This will play out in national courts in the countries where the industry players are domiciled. And if I was the CEO of any such company, I would be extremely keen that this gets sorted and that I have some international standards to look to that give some guidance also to the courts that have to adjudicate these things of how and where accountability will lie. So again, as I said, it's quite a spectrum of issues that we need to address. But I think after the REAIM cycle so far and the other processes that are ongoing, we're well set to get started.
Thank you. I like that you mentioned the decision-making process, and you both mentioned the importance of humans in the AI lifecycle, and it's exactly what I wanted to ask you about next, because through the summit yesterday, human-centric AI has been a very recurring theme. It had strong emphasis on the need to move also from principles to practice, where do humans set on the AI lifecycle, what kind of professionals do we need on each stage. And now I wanted to focus a bit on how these concepts, human-centric AI, governance, traceability, how could they be translated into the technological and the military reality that we are living. So my first question would be, when we talk about human-centric AI in the military domain, what would be its foundation elements? What would be the very basics of human-centric systems? Stephan, we can start with you.
Yeah, in terms of human-centric, I think what we do here in practical terms, we try to apply some risk management to a technology. And the risk, of course, is that the human could lose control or not be able to exercise effective or efficient control. And I think if I may draw from an analogy, in the European Union we have the Artificial Intelligence Act, which is a new piece of legislation which does not apply to military use. But in fact, since this also covers dual use kind of activities, there is a strong influence also, I would assume, in the military. And this Artificial Intelligence Act, I think, is based on the idea of judging the risk. And I think this also fits very well with what Robin was saying, the accountability, the traceability. So there has been some way to understand or to trace back what has really happened, in particular if something went wrong, but also if things work, because it would feel very uncomfortable to have some system in place which produces a result, but nobody knows exactly why and if this is reproducible. So I think this is totally unacceptable in many areas. And in this risk assessment approach, there are 4 categories of risk in this AI Act. One is an unacceptable high risk, which is basically some kind of system which would produce something which would be either contrary to law or presenting an unmanageable risk. And this is, of course, this type of artificial intelligence in the civilian field is prohibited under this EU Act. The second one is high-risk areas. This would, for instance, be applications, as said earlier, in medical uses where you cannot accept that things could go wrong. And these systems, they have special scrutiny, there has to be transparency, there has to be special approval, and there's also some kind of obligation to keep track of background data and information, if I may say so. And then, of course, if there's only limited risk for other systems, only transparency rules would apply. And I think this is a model which allows, in a certain way, to keep human control. But of course, there are many other elements. This is only one dimension. As I said earlier, one is, of course, the humans to be trained in a way so they can understand the system, the parameters, and that they know exactly at which point and in which way they can interface in an effective way with a system which, I don't know, gets out of control or becomes critical or produces something which would likely produce some givings from the user. And then, of course, governance, as I said, if you have to enshrine this into operational rules, how concretely would this work? Would this be some kind of warning window popping up in a computer, or would this be some kind of obligation to bring another person in to check the functioning of the system? So there's a strong variety of things, but at the end, let's not forget, we are in the area of risk management here, because as Robin also said, mistakes always happen, accidents happen, and humans are not perfect. Artificial intelligence will never be perfect.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. Robin, same question. What are the foundational elements of human-centric AI in the military domain?
Yeah, I think, the human-centric category is certainly one of the priorities we should address and need to kind of flesh out now going forward. I think there's a lot of convergence around the concept, and that's a really good thing. Just coming from these multilateral processes, whenever we have these new concepts and then they're very en vogue and fly around for a while, we get all very busy about identifying, defining what that concept is, and sometimes we lose sight of the fact, what problem are we actually solving here? And I think it's always, when we have these big concepts, worth reminding ourselves, what are we trying to achieve when we're discussing the human-centric approach, which sounds great, but I'm asking always, what problem are we actually trying to solve? And to me, there's the 2 dimensions. We want to make sure that those who operate artificial intelligence in high-risk situations and with critical systems, very powerful systems, that they retain judgment and control and responsibility over what they do. And so everything that is necessary to make that happen in a genuine and meaningful way, for me, is part of this human-centric box. And on the other side, there's the humans who will be soldiers and civilians who will be affected by the outcomes of the decisions and the support that these technologies will lend. And so how do we make sure that they are protected in line with applicable international law, in line with ethical standards, in line possibly with standards that we're yet to develop in the future? So that, to me, is the real problem we're trying to solve. And that has many facets and elements. Certainly, again, the conditions of governability. What does that actually mean? What does transparency mean? It's a nice thing. Everyone will agree we need transparency. But transparency in battlefield critical situations over high stakes and high risks decision, we should also be open-minded. You know, transparency might not be possible for everyone in all of its dimension that we might desire. And what do we do then? Can we find, you know, safeguards even in those situations, knowing that, of course, not everything can be disclosed and will not be disclosed in this area. We have to be realist about how we do this, otherwise this will not go far, I'm afraid. Training, I mean, has been mentioned a million times, and rightly so at this summit. Training the humans who operate AI is probably as important as the technology. From a risk management perspective, you know, they have to be sensitive to certain failures that can emerge, to automation bias that is apparently quite common among humans, that they will follow whatever the machine suggests, and that they will do so more so under time pressure and in a real battlefield scenario. We should take that into consideration and kind of war game around these scenarios to really see where the choke points and the failure potential failure points are to tease this out. So really getting real and pragmatic about how we can do this, I think, is absolutely critical. But that could really put us on a path of success.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep reality always in mind. And for our final segment of our conversation, I would like to talk about how we can move from everything we just mentioned in our last question into practice and real tasks. So maybe we could, I was thinking we could reflect on how responsibilities and roles, because we keep talking about accountability, tracing back decisions. So how can roles and responsibilities be distributed in a range to obtain operational and responsible AI whenever possible? As Robin mentioned, there are always some limitations. So my question would be, moving from principles to practice, what roles should, for example, governments, the industry, civil society, or even international organizations play in order to achieve a responsible AI in the military domain, given the context that we live in? What main roles could you identify? Robin, we can continue with you if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally in this multi-stakeholder domain, there is a huge treasure that the multilateral system so far has not fully exhausted and in the way that it can really bring this meaningful input. I mean, the creativity in academia can still be linked in better ways and deeper ways to these processes. Civil society, the same, has helped to push the envelope on a number of critical issues. And industry in particular, because they're so powerful, obviously, in designing these technologies, but to my mind also increasingly open-minded about getting governance right, is a huge opportunity also in an otherwise really difficult world, which we should try as best as we can to leverage and to use and to fulfill meaningfully. So I think this multi-stakeholder approach will not always work in all fora, and we should also be open-minded about that. But I think REAIM in particular provides this wonderful platform for the diversity of the different approaches. And so we need to think creatively, how can we make the most about this opportunity of bringing all of this together in this forum. And I think the Global Commission in the last cycle has done a wonderful job. The regional consultations that UNIDIR was also leading and executing with different regional players, I think that has been an important building block. So it's also about the processes, how do we make that meaningful? And I think we should, like AI, we should test and retest. Are we really on the right track? Is this the best format to do it? And while doing it, we should be very open-minded about the complementary role that this forum and platform and REAIM cycle really has to processes at the United Nations. We should make sure there is good complementarity and that we're really adding value and not duplicating what's being done elsewhere.
Yeah, thank you. Before moving on to you, Stephan, just one more second, because I did want to ask, you emphasized on the industry, so I'm assuming that the engagement of the scientific community, military, and also the industry would be a good starting point for all the everything you just mentioned. Do you believe that it's actually important to engage, to obtain industry engagement for this? Yeah,
yes.
Okay, that's perfect. I mean,
the answer is a clear and straightforward yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay, perfect, yeah. And now, yes, we move to you, Stephan. Same question as Robin, as we move from principles to practice, what roles do you identify that could be critical, or even not pinpoint the specific role, but maybe how we could distribute these responsibilities?
Indeed, as you said in your question, it's a distributed responsibility in this very complex field. And maybe I try to draw also from the experience we have gained in other arms control areas, and which are multi-stakeholder processes. And I think the answer on the industry was, again, for sure the industry has to be engaged. And of course the industry, as we know from European Union, often there's a kind of a criticism about over-regulation. But in some areas, industry is also finding it quite helpful that there is some guidance, some regulation. What is important, I think, is that in terms of setting standards, which is kind of the ultimate objective in such complicated areas, is to work together with all partners. And partners means here industry, the civilian society, research, but also other countries and other kind of entities which maybe have different approaches. And I think, of course, this is a very lengthy process. And here again, REAIM is, of course, at the center of this exercise. And then, of course, we have not spoken so much about academia and research, and I would just say from European Union angle, we engaged in a number of projects to basically develop some better understanding of not only artificial intelligence, but also what emerging and disruptive technologies can produce. We have a project with UNIDIR, to say the beginning, but also with the Stockholm Peace Research Institute and other institutions which allow in a certain way to gain some insight, some understanding. And I think this is very central. And then, of course, it's always important to see who can do what. In a certain way, it's not necessary that everyone does everything, and this is very central. And here the EU, of course, has as a convening power, has achieved quite some developments, and in particular in this field, I don't want to repeat myself on accountability and international human law, but it's also important to understand yourself as a bridge builder between different approaches and different kind of actors and societies. And I think here international organizations like UN, EU, but also often some technical organizations who work in certain industries can play a very central role. And these kind of, I would not say smaller, but less visible organization, they are often overlooked. They can fill in certain gaps which we may not even understand today.
Yeah, this, as challenging as that might be with different countries and regulations and points of view. That was the last segment I wanted to cover, but I did wanted to leave you a couple minutes for a final statement, because we've been sat here for a bit, but I always like to give you the chance to just express, well, obviously related to human-centric and military AI, but something you would like the people in the room to leave with a clear idea, either where we're headed, either something that we are currently doing that needs changing, just your final message for all of us, pretty much. Stephan, you want to get started with that one?
No, thank you very much. It can be very brief and simple. I think it's very important to kind of find some ways how to govern artificial intelligence in military use, because obviously the other way around, we would be governed or be affected without having control. This is a very central element. And in terms of tools, I would think international cooperation is very key on this, because this is a global phenomenon. And then also, of course, it's very important to set common standards in this regard, and to build capacity and help other countries to build capacity. And maybe last but not least, I want to quote, but I forgot the name, a Spanish philosopher, which was also quoted yesterday, who said that the best invention or best technology humankind ever invented is ethics. And I think this should be the backbone of the overall thinking in this area.
Yes, thank you. Robin, any final message for us?
And I can just underline the importance of capacity building, of course, and there everyone will agree, capacity building, yes. And again, I would say let's be really serious and clear-eyed about what kind of capacity building actually adds value and is useful. And that will also be a dynamic process. As the technology and our insights evolve, of course, we also need to adapt the way we build capacity around these issues. I think that's one. The other, and I don't want to be, in a sense, disrespectful, but if I look around the room, I seem to be the average age group here. And I think, for next generation scholars in the next re-aim cycle, there is something that could still be done, and that would be a useful dimension and component to add to the discussions from what I see and can tell. And then lastly, if we could drive home further this insight that governance of this technology certainly doesn't stand in the way of innovation, but rather enables innovation going forward and enables benefits for all. Governance doesn't stand in the way of effective military operations. It enables effective military operations, and it supports business cases for developing technologies that are ethically and legally acceptable. So I think if we can drive that home further going forward, that's the kind of way we need to keep the momentum, to build further momentum, to really go somewhere in the future with this process.
That's a roadmap then. Well, thank you both very much for your time. I think we've covered. I think we've done a bit of everything. Looked at the past, the present, where we're headed. We talked about the importance. If there is one thing that's been talked about in this summit, is the importance of humans in the AI life cycle. So all that's left for me to do is thank you both very much for your insights. And I just wanted to ask the audience to give a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you. Before we continue, just a quick announcement. If authorities and heads of delegations could please head just outside of the auditorium for the family photo, that would be great. That's going to be happening in a couple of minutes, so please make your way outside. Not outside of the building, just outside of the auditorium. Everyone else, please stay in the auditorium. We just need your cooperation for a couple minutes so we can arrange the logistics of the family photos. So please just stay here. It's raining outside. There's no point of living anyways. It's warm. We're comfortable. So just stay with us for a couple minutes. Thank you, everyone.